is what is the value of a company. We got a nice taste of what an income statement and a balance sheet look like. We're going to totally throw all this away and start again. And we're going to start with a brand new topic. How do we value things? Not just Apple stock, but anything. How do we value stuff? How do we value cash flow? Contra asset, yeah, we don't have to worry about accounting just quite yet. Now we're going to talk about something probably a lot more important, which is how do we value cash flow? And what is cash flow? And what is discounting cash flow and all this stuff? And this is a pretty complicated field. And I can probably teach you the definitions in 30 seconds. But the point of this is to understand it like the back of your hand, not to be able to recite a definition. And what we did with Apple, it's more technical, more kind of detailed. This is much more theoretical. So what's a dollar worth? I ask this question a lot in like every interview for financial people. I ask this question like 20 different ways. And one of my favorite questions is one of my first interview questions is I say, if I give you $1 every year, every January 1st, and it's actually a contract, it literally is a contract that I'm going to sign right here, Martin Shkreli. And it says in the fine print, it says section 2, January 1st forever, I give you $1. Section 2 says you can sell and transfer this contract. Okay, so I give this contract to you, Mr. Maduri. Okay. Congratulations, you've gotten this contract for absolutely nothing. And you want to sell it. You want to sell it to Charlie. How much does he pay? This is actually a very, very tough question to answer.
But my answer is that present value of $1 is if you had $1 now versus $1 next year, you could use it out in the market and you can maybe earn interest on it or make an investment. So you kind of pick a common or what looks to be a trending interest rate. Use the present value table. Once you get into perpetuity of the present value $1, it stops really mattering how many years. So when people are talking about ages, that's why it kind of doesn't really matter. So you'd rather have $1 now versus later, so you'd rather sell it, I'd say around $13.50.
$13.50, wow.
Bam!
What an answer. Charlie, do you accept? You're buying it for $13.50? What are you doing?
I accept it.
All right, you're done. $13.50, trade's done. All right, so we got one smart person up in here.
That was a great question, Martin. I love it.
I've got 100 variations of this that I ask finance people who want to work for me, who want to invest my money or help me invest, and it's pretty complicated. Well, it's all about, and I will explain why $50. I will explain in tremendous detail. We'll spend the next. If I do my job right here, I'll excite you so much about this that you'll spend the rest of your life trying to think about what cash flow is worth. Your cash flow, a business's cash flow, a septic tank pumping company's cash flow, an electricity company's cash flow, a drug company's cash flow, anything. And so this is just one small example of how do we value future cash flow. So we know how to value today's cash flow. If I said I'm going to give you $5 in 5 minutes, and I say, well, what would you sell that contract for? Well, it's going to be about $5. I mean, depending on the uncertainty, it could be $4.9999. There's actually people that do this. It's called overnight repos, if you want to look into that. There's actually a market for this kind of paper. It's actually repurchases as repos. And there's actually a marketplace for that kind of transaction where it's literally the interest of $1, the interest of something literally from the night to the morning is a repo. And there's things like called carry trades where you're carrying a trade for just a short period of time and you're earning an infinitesimally small amount of interest. Obviously, it's easy to determine the discounted value of something in a short period of time. But what if I told you I was going to give you $1,000 in 10 years, or I can give you $100 a year for 9 years? Which one's better?
So I prefer to start receiving the money now.
Well, this isn't, as you can imagine, this isn't a guessing game. This is something we can actually calculate to extreme precision.
Okay. So are you going to use like a 7% return on the $100?
We could use any return we want. And that's the great thing about it is we could say, well, what if we don't make a return? What if we do make money? with the $100 a year? What if we, et cetera, et cetera? What if there's inflation? What if there's deflation? All these things, we can actually get an exact answer. And that's what finance is all about. This is literally the discipline known as finance. So the concept that our guest, who was quite good and quite eloquent, pointed out is that $1 today is usually worth more than $1 tomorrow. Not just usually, almost always. Why? And the answer to the $1,000 question and the answer to the $1 question all lies in this concept. It all lies in this kind of concept. Why? One, someone said inflation. Okay, I guess that's true. We could talk more about inflation. The better answer is the keels. It's opportunity cost. Or just say opportunity or investment potential. Same way molecules have potential energy. If you had $1 today, let's say it's Monday. Let's say it's Monday, January 1st, 2016, and you had $1,000 versus Monday, January 1st, 2019, and you have $1,000. Which is the better place to be if you're an investor? Well, you'd much rather be in 2016 because you can invest that $1,000. And let's say you make a 10% return per year. Well, in 2017, you would have $1,100. In 2018, how much would you have? $1,210, right? And in 2019, how much would you have? You would actually have $1,331 in 2019 versus $1,000 in 2019. So the ability to invest the money and earn a return is why $1 today is worth more than $1 tomorrow. But how much more? And why did we pick 10% here? Why not 20% or 3% or 1%? And what about negative percentages? So we have to think about all of those things. And this is what finance is all about. We toss and turn about this. We toss and turn about all this stuff. What about risk? What a fantastic point. Danny Argueta, you are a special person. That is the most important thing, in fact, is risk. And we'll talk about that soon. So this is really it's kind of a very theoretical part of finance, and I love it because it's almost philosophical even. It's almost philosophical. And what's so philosophical and theoretical about it? Well, we know that $1 today is worth more than $1 tomorrow, but Apple has that exact issue. In fact, every stock we're ever going to look at, the concept is $1 today and $1 tomorrow are something to think about. So if Apple makes $18 billion a quarter, that means they make what? $70 billion a year? And if they make $70 billion a year, we can actually discount that and add it up. And we'll talk about that in a second. But keep the Apple example in mind. All right, so now we have the question of how much is $1, how much less or more is $1 worth today than tomorrow? Okay, so like I said, if I told you I was going to give you $5 today, or this year, and I was going to give you $5 next year, and every year thereafter, we obviously, if we summed all these things up, I don't know if you guys know this, sigma means sum, capital sigma in Greek. If we summed all of these from beginning of 2016 to infinity, what would the answer be?
It would be infinity.
Yeah, it would actually be infinity because we'd have an infinite number of years. And obviously the right to get $5 a year forever is not worth infinity. It is not worth infinity. It is worth less than infinity for sure. So why? Why? Well, let's go year by year. So if I told you I was going to give you $5 right now, you'd say, oh yeah, that sounds like it's worth $5. I trust you, Mark. I think you have $5. What about $5 next year? Well, who knows about next year? You may not know. You may not be able to collect next year. God only knows. And then again, the idea that $5 will be worth $5 next year, it won't be. We know at least there might be some inflation. We know that I'd rather have the $5 today than a year from now because I can invest. That $5 and maybe make a few percentage return. So $5 in 2017 is probably worth less than $5 in 2016. It's probably worth less. The $5 in 2018 is worth even less than that of 2017. So let's say it was worth, let's say 3% less. What would that annuity be worth? So let's do this out in Excel. And Excel is great because you can just simply do it the way you see me doing it here. So $5, and we're going to take $5 times 0.97, which is 3% less than before. And we're going to copy and paste all the way down. And you can see that as we get less and less, we approach a value of what? Each year, the value of that $5 approaches 0. It's like an asymptote in calculus, right? And in fact, we can kind of even graph what the $5 per annum. Remember, the face value is $5 every year. It's always going to be $5. In year 2250, you will get $5. In year 2300, it's not going to be worth much. And so we can actually graph this and so to see what it looks like. It'll be fun to see that. Yeah, here you can see the value of $5. It sort of reaches this asymptote of 0. In math, an asymptote is a line that approaches another number, another line, but never quite touches it. And you can see that by the time it's like 50 years out, it really isn't, the $5 really isn't worth very much. It's worth maybe $1. So if we take the sum of this, equals sum, and we sum all of these numbers, we get $166. $5 a year forever is about $166 today. Even though if we sum all the cash we were going to get, it was $1,660. This is, let's see how many years this was for. How many years was this contract for? 332 years. It was a 332-year bond where I get $5 every year. I'm going to collect, by the end of the bond, I'm going to collect $1,660. But today, the bond would trade for $166. Why? We got to think about this. We got to think about it carefully. What if we only discount by and let's add more years to this. Let's go into thousands of years. See what happens if we do that. So we're going to call the rate at which we discount the cash flow from one year to the next the discount rate. And we're going to change this formula. I encourage you all to make this Excel sheet yourself. We're going to change this formula to the discount rate. We're going to see what happens when we change the discount rate to 10%. What do you think the value of the bond will do? Obviously, the amount we're going to collect will be the same. This contract promises us $9,310. $5 a year for a long time. Let's see how many years we put in this. If we increase the discount rate, what's the value of this contract?
It's going to be lower.
Yeah, it's going to be lower. Why?
Because it approaches 0 at an earlier rate. It gets closer to 0 at a much earlier time.
Yeah, so we can see that it goes down to $50. If it's 5%, it's $100. If it's 3%, it's $166. If it's 2%, it's $250. You can see that they're inversely proportional. In fact, a fascinating thing is as the discount rate approaches 0, the value of the bond approaches what?
$9,310.
No, it approaches infinity. Why do you think it approaches infinity? Well, the answer is if $1 today was not worth the same as $1 tomorrow, then it would be worth something vastly more. But we assume that money is worth less over time because of things like risk and opportunity cost. So we have to think very carefully about how to discount a series of cash flow. And in businesses and bonds and stocks, we have these yearly cash flows we come to expect. In this case, this is very boring. We expect $5 every year forever. Businesses obviously aren't like this. The cash flow we get fluctuates. We hope it grows, right? We hope that the CEO of the company figures out a way to make this go from 5 to 6, from 6 to 7, from 7 to 8, hopefully from 8 to 800. If you're a CEO like me, you want as much profit as possible. And you have to discount that cash flow because something might go wrong in the year 2029. You can't predict what the earnings of your business will be in 2029. Can you imagine the people who were forecasting Motorola's earnings 10 years ago? Motorola and Nokia were on the top of the world 10, 20 years ago, right? What is the interest rate of a government bond? Does anyone know what the 10-year bonds yield?
Not much. I mean, like 1%.
Yeah, it's about 2%, 1.7%, 1.5%, something like that. 1.74, this guy may be a bond trader. So apparently the government says it's not less than inflation. It's not less than inflation. So the US government bond is theoretically risk-free. Right? It's theoretically risk-free. There's no risk that Obama and Trump, our future president, will not pay the obligations, right? What if the government fails? It's a great question. It's a great question. There's no risk that the government won't pay its debts. We'll talk about how realistic that is in a second. And theoretically, there's some risk, right? And we could actually measure that risk with a Bloomberg machine, believe it or not, and something called a strip or a TIPS security. But regardless of a TIPS security, we can see that the government bonds have an interest rate of about 1.74%. So the government can borrow money from us for 1.74%. That means that we get this interest rate. And in fact, the risk of not getting paid is worth 1.7.4% to us. And that's simple. If I lent Charlie $5,000, I would ask him for 10% interest because, I don't know Charlie. He seems like a nice guy and he seems very smart. So the fact that I'm willing to lend him any money at all. Now, if a friend of mine named Maurice, who has a arrest record, and Maurice wanted to borrow $5,000 from me, I don't know. What interest rate should I charge him? I think Maurice is more likely to default. Yeah, I think I'm gonna charge him a higher interest rate because I just don't think Maurice is gonna pay me. In fact, there's probably no interest rate that I would take. Here's another good one, Brazil. This guy's making a good point. Brazil is 6% interest rate right now. The U.S. government is 2%. So we can see what the least risky securities are. We can make a list, in fact. U.S., 1.74%. Brazil, 6%. Apple, I think, is borrowing money at 2%. So you can see that the riskier a loan is, or a cash flow is, the less we expect to get paid. The less we can discount it. The riskier a loan is, the more we have to discount it. So if we have a corporation, remember, these are bonds. These are secured obligations. Bonds are senior to equity. Cash flow from equity is riskier. So when Apple makes $18 million this year, this is Apple's income statement, we don't know what they're going to make in 2017. It could be 10% more. It could be 10% less. We don't know. We have no idea. Let's look at an athlete. Let's take name an athlete everyone likes. LeBron James, Steph Curry. So what is the value of Steph Curry's contract? Let's say he's going to make $10 million a year for 5 years. I don't even know what team he plays for. Golden State Warriors, I think.
Yeah.
So let's say he's going to make $10 million a year for 5 years. What's the value of his contract? On paper, you're going to get $50 million in payments. But what about present value? Well, it's a guaranteed contract from a major company. So it's probably not very risky. But even the least risky thing, a government bond, a promise from the U.S. government, has never broken its promise in 250 years. Has never broken its promise. Is not about to break it soon. That's the most ironclad Iron, at least for 𝗏𝗏s, it's never broken its promise. Apple, very creditworthy. Brazil, Charlie, Bob. these are much riskier. So, but Steph Curry is the Golden State Warriors.
You gotta discount that.
No, he's gonna get his money. And remember, his contract says, paid
If you're discounting,
even if injured.
you gotta discount Steph Curry.
I would say a discount rate of 5% would be appropriate.
Okay.
So in Excel, what we do here is we actually do something like this. It goes equals NPV, parentheses, 5%, comma, and then we highlight all of these, and we get a number. It's $43,290,000. That is the present value. And why is it 43 million and not 50 million? Can anyone answer that? The more likely scenario is that there's opportunity cost. And it's not like he's not going to collect. He's going to collect 50 million. There's no doubt. The point is, he would rather trade 5 equal installments of 10 million for $44 million or $45 million. And the discount rate, this is a really important concept right here. You guys, this is gold here, what I'm about to tell you. It's a secret. The discount rate should be equal to the risk-free rate, which is usually just projected inflation, or the U.S. government bonds, U.S. Treasury bonds, plus the risk premium. So what does this mean? Well, all securities have the same inflation risk, right? Bob and Charlie don't have any different inflation risk than the U.S.'s inflation risk. Brazil has its own inflation risks, right? But there's some risk amount that we're going to assign to everyone, right? Like the U.S. is 1.7%. Then we have to add a little bit more risk. So in the case of Steph Curry, we're going to say, all right, well, government bonds are 1.7%, so it has to be more than that. So it's going to be some percentage more than that. And it's going to equal some percentage. And we've decided arbitrarily, right? Arbitrarily that the 1.7%, we're going to add 3.3% to equal 5%. And this is the inflation risk in essence. The inflation risk. And this is the opportunity risk, opportunity cost. And this is a very theoretical concept. And part of it is based on how well Steph Curry can invest this money. If he can't invest it very well, then we just have to think about, or we're going to assume he can't invest it at all. We're going to assume that it's some risk like the risk-free risk, plus this crazy risk that perhaps the NBA defaults or that Golden State tries to get him out of his contract or something like that. And if we use that, we can actually refer to the discount rate here, down here. And we see that it's a lot closer to the 50 million. The only way it's worth 50 million is if the discount rate is 0. And it can't be 0 because there's some risk of default. There always is. There always is. Unless you have the money in your hands. And there's a lot of money to be made. This is a good question. Which would never happen because the risk is irrelevant. A lot of fortunes are made. A lot of fortunes are made and lost. In fact, I would say most fortunes are made and lost because someone correctly predicts that a very unlikely thing happens or doesn't happen. And that's sort of a big crux of finance. A good example is Warren Buffett with Coca-Cola and American Express and many of other Buffett stocks. He paid a large price for it. They did not seem to be cheap stocks when he bought them. They traded at 20 times, 30 times earnings. But he correctly predicted, and you could have bought other stocks for 15 times earnings. But unlike these stocks, he correctly predicted that they were not default. They would not be risk to these assets. They were too protected by their brands and things like that. He called them moats. That 20, 30 years from now, Coca-Cola would still be selling more Coke than they did the year before, American Express, et cetera, et cetera. And then the opposite is always true. A lot of people value a company for 15 times earnings. They say, well, there's not much risk that those earnings don't happen. And they're wrong. Sometimes things happen to earnings. A good example is a company like Best Buy or Valiant or other companies where earnings look really good and then all of a sudden they look really bad. And you're left having paid a price that reflects that the earnings are going to be really good forever. Blockbuster Video, a good example. Blockbuster Video. Even Netflix, who knows? Is Netflix tomorrow's Blockbuster? Doesn't seem like it today. Back then, you would have never thought Blockbuster would have gone bankrupt. All of these things come and go, and the price we pay for things is very important because it implies a discount rate. This is the present value of an annuity happens in this formula. We can also do something like this. There's different formulas we can use, and eventually we're going to work our way up to something called a discounted cash flow or a discounted dividend model, which we basically did with Steph Curry. It's a more technical version of Steph Curry's present value that we calculate. And remember, in Excel, you can just do equals, NPV, discount rate, and then cash flow series. That's how you do it in Microsoft Excel. I don't know how to do it in any other application like Google or whatever. So again, you're gonna spend a lifetime thinking about the way to discount cash flows. That is the essence of business, finance, and investing. I can't teach it to you in one lesson because it's going to be a lifetime of experience and learning. And that's what, in essence, all of investing is all about, is what is the risk to your cash flow. But we can go back to public companies like Apple and do some more forecasting and see kind of what likely is going to happen to investments in public companies and private. We can do some private stuff too. And we can try to discount and use examples and things like that.